A somber Friday, but a Friday nonetheless. So that means it's time to answer some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Well, it's no surprise that today we set a record for questions in the Mailbag Friday. We got 45 questions to get to, so I'm not going to be able to be as long-winded as I typically am in some of those questions because I want to make sure that we get to every single question. So first one comes from Zach Clements Believer, clearly a KU fan there. What do you expect payroll to be next season? Well, a couple of guys are going to be either off the books or going to be cheaper, I believe. So Jordan Lyles is going to be off the books. They're not paying him anymore, of course. A couple of the one-year deal guys, they're going to be off the books. But I would envision the Royals being, kind of where they were in payroll this year for next year. It wouldn't shock me if they jump up a few spots, kind of get toward the middle of the league, because as we expressed yesterday, I feel like they're going to make a splash or two for the lineup, and that's going to be a little bit more costly than they're used to and adding pieces to the lineup. So I do believe they're going to jump closer toward the middle of the league, but certainly won't be a top 10 team in terms of payroll for 2025. Alex asked, how many times will the Royals plunk Jazz Chisholm next season? It is interesting. It'll probably depend on who Jazz plays for. I can't remember if Jazz is a rental or not for the Yankees, but if he's still on the Yankees, it wouldn't surprise me, although I think there's been a lot of scenarios this year in which the Royals could have plunked somebody and they decided not to. I don't get the vibe that anybody in the rotation would be willing to throw at somebody because a suspension would happen from that. So I think the Royals probably won't unless there was some isolated scenario where something happens again. There's a little bit of a dust up like we had in Game 4, although I don't even consider that to be a dust up. It just felt silly to me. And then the Royals might. But I don't think anything's going to come from it. And if Jazz Chisholm's a Yankee next year, I'd rather just get him out than actually plunk him, which they got him out pretty easily in this series, except for Lucas Ursu, who gave up the home run in Game 2, though it was a win for the Royals. Looks like Mizzou Plug asks, I know you'll address this later, but roster reconstruction free agent names that fit. Well, I put this out there earlier on Twitter, and you can always find me at JohnnyJ_15. I'm going off the pattern that the Royals usually do, where if they talk to somebody one-off season and they don't land them, if they're a free agent the next year, they're probably going to go talk to that guy again. One name that comes up is not Michael Conforto, sorry. I think he's one of those options that could fit. I talked about that last night. But Tyler O'Neill is another guy that I think the Royals might try to contact again. He does have some very crazy splits. He destroys left-handed hitters. Doesn't hit righties well at all. He's coming off a 31 home run season for Boston. Good walk rate, a lot of strikeouts. Not always healthy, but for the right price, I think it would make sense for the Royals. That there's no perfect fit in my opinion because Jurickson Profar will be out there. I don't see him, going anywhere else other than San Diego. You could look at somebody like Jesse Winker. I'd imagine he'll probably go back to the Mets because of the way that he's meshed there, unless somebody gives him a big time deal. A few other names that come to mind. Yeah, I brought up Conforto as well. I'm blanking on the last name that I had in my list there. But to me, the Royals wanted Seth Lugo in the offseason going into 2023. The Padres got him. Next offseason, they approached him again. It wouldn't shock me if the Royals go after a guy like Tyler O'Neill again because of their interest in the offseason going into 2024. Chris Gibbs asked what corner outfielders are realistic targets. Yeah, I think for the free agent market, I put this out there on Twitter again. I keep saying that over and over again. But the names that I had listed, the one I forgot was Anthony Santander and Teoscar Hernandez. So to me, of the corner outfield options, I think Tyler O'Neill, Anthony Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, Michael Conforto, and Jurickson Profar. Not all of them are going to be affordable, but if the Royals are going to make a splash and really make a name for themselves in free agency, those are the free agent names I think that would have the biggest impact. Probably the most affordable would be Michael Conforto. Then I would go Tyler O'Neill. Then I bet it would go Teoscar Profar Santander. I think that would be my best bet as to who will be the most expensive. Could be way off on that. I'll need to go back and review all the market values for those guys. But those feel like the options I think best fit the Royals if they are to make a big splash. Looks like Latino Low asks, do you see the Royals overhauling the outfield? I don't see them moving on from Kyle Isbell. I think he'll be back in the center fielder for this team. Hunter Renfroe has a player option. I'd imagine he'll take it and come back to the Royals because I think the Royals might view him as their right fielder if he stays healthy. And the good thing is, if Hunter Renfroe stays healthy, you saw what he was able to do in the middle of the season. Then he got hurt again, and that set him back, and that's why he wasn't really playing in the postseason. But to me, I think Hunter Renfroe could be a good right fielder for this team, and that way you put all your focus on trying to add a legitimate left fielder and a big-time bat for third base. You know, somebody like an Alex Bregman comes to mind. I'm not saying it's likely, but he's going to be a big name for third base if the Royals wanted to spend a lot of money there. So I don't see it being an overhaul. I do see two of the three returning, but I don't think MJ Melendez is going to be the everyday starter next year for the Royals. Jared asked, what's the ETA for Jack Caglione? I don't think there's a need to rush him, mainly because the Royals probably feel fine at first base. And, you know, if they get somebody, for example, for this hypothetical, like an Anthony Santander, they have first base and DH locked up right there. So to me, I don't think they would need to rush Jack Caglione. If he dominates early on in the year, I think he could be up in Kansas City as early as the second half of 2025. But if it's a slower brewing thing early on, he struggles, they're trying to iron him out a little bit, I don't think there's a rush to get him up there in 2025. And I don't think the Royals should view him as a fix for a possible flaw in the lineup of 2025. You want to bring him along when the offense is thriving, and maybe he can just boost that a little bit. But right now, I think best case scenario, he's up in the second half in 2025, you know, but probably at this point, if it's a slower process here, they really want to develop him, I would expect early on in 2026. Aiden asks, most likely free agent, Santander, Hernandez, Jurickson Profar, Tyler O'Neill, Michael Conforto. If I'm going likeliest, I'll say Tyler O'Neill just because of their previous interest. I have no idea if they are interested in Profar or Hernandez or Santander or Conforto. But last year, it was multiple stories came out that the Royals were interested with Tyler O'Neill. In fact, I think it was between Boston and Kansas City, and he decided to go with Boston. So likeliest, I'm just going off of previous interest, so I'll say Tyler O'Neill for that. Mike asked, do you think Pham is a re-signable candidate? I did get asked this a few times in person today. I would love to see Tommy Pham back, but I believe Tommy Pham wants to go somewhere where he can start every single day. And that's not going to be in Kansas City, at least not in my opinion. I don't think the Royals will give one of their starting spots to somebody who's, you know, nearing his late 30s. And the Royals, I think, would love to have him back as a guy that could play 2 to 3 times a week. But I think Tommy Pham wants to start somewhere and clearly feels like he still can start somewhere. It's a possibility, but I think he wants to start. And I feel like the only teams that would be willing to start him every single day would be a team looking to flip him at the deadline and next year for 2025. Spoons asked, have a lot in one. How do you see the starting pitching playing out? Waka opting out. Do they trade Singer, Kyle Wright? How do you see the starting rotation next year? Yeah, I think the rotation is going to return Reagans and Lugo and Marsh for sure. Those would be the three, I think, that come back. Michael Waka, I think, will get a qualifying offer from the Royals, which is just north of $21.5 million. But I think that seems enticing for a guy that's reaching his mid-30s. I feel like that is a very healthy offer for a guy in his mid-30s. And if he pitches well again, then he can hit the open market and test the waters then. But considering Michael Waka makes $16 million, that's a pretty big jump for a qualifying offer. So I think Walker's going to be back. And then for Singer, that's what's going to be interesting. If 4 of those guys come back, the Royals would have to be confident that somebody could take over that number 4 spot and pretty much give the same production that Brady Singer did in 2024. So right now, I'm going to say that Singer is back, but I would be pretty surprised if he wasn't entertained in some trade possibilities this offseason. But I do think they can return the entire rotation. As for Kyle Wright, I think they want to slowly bring him along. I wouldn't even bank on him, making the roster right out of camp because there's a lot of spots that are already filled. And if he does make it up to the big leagues, I'd imagine they'll start him in a long relief role. But good questions there from Spoons. Okay, we'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, plenty of more questions to get into next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor in Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhoodgold.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. The next round of questions begins with Powder Blues. What's the best memory of this season? It's funny, back-to-back questions now. I was asked in person today. One that sticks out to me, and I don't know why, other than this team getting into first place that late in the season, but the time where they took the third game of the series, the first three actually, against Cleveland in late August, and it tied them for first place in the American League Central. What I loved about it was that you had that rain delay. Michael Lorenzen left early in that game, and the Royals found a way to win late. And what I loved about it was that I was up here in my office playing some video games, waiting for the game to resume, and yet everybody was still on, pins and needles, waiting for the game to start again. They didn't want it to be postponed. They wanted to be played that night, and Cleveland was thinking the opposite. They didn't want that game to be played because the Royals had played so well in the first couple games of the series. But they go out there, they knew first place was on the line. It was an entire bullpen game, basically, and the Royals won. And I love the fact that the Royals had gotten to first place at that point in the season, but it was all the listeners and followers following along, staying up, couldn't wait for this game to resume. And that's what I loved so much about it, was that, this team was able to get that type of following throughout the season and how invested people were, even if it meant staying up till midnight, basically, for that game to conclude. So that would be my best memory of 2024. Yes, the comeback against the Mariners was great. Yes, the playoff wins in Baltimore were, but that was kind of a niche thing for me to see how many fans actually cared that much about the Royals in 2024. Mike has the question of, with Dozier's 2025 number going from 9.25 to 1 million, could that help justify extending a qualifying offer to Walker, assuming he opts out? Absolutely. I mean, there's some extra cash on the table there. I would be very interested in how they're going to use it, because there's a lot of guys that go off the books, some of the one-year deal guys that didn't have a qualifying offer or player option. So the Royals will have some money to spend and play around with, maybe for a possible extension for somebody like Cole Reagans, but also to make sure a guy like Michael Walker is back in this rotation for 2025. Philip has the question of, why didn't Q get more creative with the pitching in the postseason? Obviously, the pitching wasn't to blame, but for one of the best and deepest rotations in baseball, why didn't we see more Singer, Lorenzen, Lynch, and Marsh? Could have used them all in the same way, right? Well, Marsh wasn't on the playoff roster. I was surprised Daniel Lynch never got a crack at it. I think, though, it was because Angel Serpa and Sam Long became so trustworthy in the roles that they were in, and Brady Singer only faced one batter, and he struck out Aaron Judge. But Brady Singer didn't really feel like he was going to come in unless somebody got bombed early on in the outing, and no Royal starter really got just tagged from the get-go. Every single starter gave this team a chance to bridge the gap to the bullpen, and those guys were there more so for emergencies. I would have liked to see Daniel Lynch. I would have liked to see Brady Singer more and Lorenzen a little bit more, but to me, the bullpen rotation did well enough where I'm not really sure I'm going to criticize too many moves. If there were games the Royals blew multiple times in a series, then yeah, I probably would have questioned it a little bit more. And I know you brought up that the pitching wasn't the problem, but I just think that they fell into a rhythm of the guys they could trust, and they didn't really want to roll the dice with guys that hadn't pitched in a couple of weeks. Jeff has the question of when will the awards be given out? I believe at the end of this, I think at the conclusion of the World Series, if I'm not mistaken. I can't really remember what it was last year, but I am more so fascinated because we know that Aaron Judge is going to win the MVP. I'm curious who manager of the year will go to, if it'll be AJ Hinch, Stephen Vogt, or Matt Quatrero from the American League side, because those feel like the top three candidates. AJ Hinch has certainly now put himself in the running and might win it if the Tigers get to the ALCS. But I believe it is at the very end of the season when they hand out all of those awards. Next one comes from Tough Mitch. What do we do about the outfield? Is MJ Melendez making the opening day roster? I do think he makes the opening day roster. I do not think he's a starter on the opening day roster. I think that he will be one of those fourth outfielder guys, a platoon bat, somebody that provides you some power off the bench, in the same way that Paul DeYoung, he didn't get in at all in the postseason, but he was somebody toward the end where if you needed somebody to run into one in the ninth inning, he's there for it. So I think MJ Melendez will be on this team next year, just not as a starter. And I think they're going to go out there and add at least one impact bat, which will probably be an impact left fielder, in my opinion. If Hunter Renfroe is not back, then look for two impact bats. But I do think if they are to add any pieces, I would look to left field. I would look to third base is my pick for what they may do in free agency. This one is from Mike. With the numerous 40-man spots opening up, Pham, DeYoung, Frazier, Grossman, Gurriel, Smith, and possibly Waka, would you view that as added flexibility protecting minor leaguers, or easier to justify adding big leaguers without sacrificing a DFA if it's through free agency? There's not many guys I would think are super necessary to protect on the 40-man roster. There's a few that I would like to see the Royals add because I believe they'll be on the big league roster at some point. Noah Cameron comes to mind. Eric Sarantola comes to mind. Javier Vaz comes to mind. I'm blanking on one more guy. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But with all those guys leaving, I think it's more so about they can go add some guys through free agency that can immediately hop on the 40-man roster and then the 26-man roster. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes to that 40-man. And I think a couple of guys they're going to be willing to DFA because they either didn't play on the team this year, like a Josh Taylor or a Dan Altavilla, of course, although he was up for a couple of innings. But some guys that, were either on an injured list all season long or didn't even get out of AAA. I think there'll be a lot of space opening up on the 40-man roster here in the coming months. Dylan asked, is Alex Bregman a realistic option for the Royals at third base? What do you think Shane Bieber's market value will be coming off Tommy John? Well, Bregman is going to be one of the most expensive guys in free agency. So if the Royals went after him, that might be their only piece. That might be their go-to guy of we want an impact bat, a leadoff guy that can play third base. Michael Garcia moves to more of a backup utility role, but it would be very expensive, and it would be for a handful of years. So that would be the price of going after Alex Bregman. And as for Shane Bieber, that's a great question on the market value because for a guy coming off Tommy John, it has to go way down. But if it's a full recovery, I mean, you're paying for a guy that still could be a front two guy in a rotation. So will the Royals look into that? I doubt it. I could see Cleveland trying to make a play for him again, but I do believe it's going to be significantly cheaper than if he did pitch a full season this year. This one comes from Steven, who's winning the World Series this year. I hate making this pick because they're still in the divisional round, but I'm going to go with I'm going to hate this if they lose tonight, but I'm going to go with the Padres. I'm hitching my wagon to the Padres. I'm rooting for the Padres. They're such a fun team, but they got to get past the Dodgers. So this could be stupid here in about a few hours if the Dodgers beat the Padres and eliminate them. But I'll stick my neck out there. What the hell? It's a little bit fun. It's a hot take. I'll go with the Padres winning the World Series. George asked the question of if Waka leaves, I like Bubic in spite of his relief performance back in the rotation. What about Kyle Wright as another option? We need a corner outfielder this offseason. Hopefully saw with the rotation already. Who do you think? As for Bubic moving, I kind of like him in the setup role. I know you brought it up that, the performance was great. This is the best we've ever seen Chris Bubic look, and a good bullpen is going to go a long way for this team in 2025. And since he's not been stretched out to be a starter in a long time, I'm going to leave him there, and I just believe that Walker is going to be coming back. And as for Kyle Wright, I think if he makes the team at any point this year, it'll be in long relief. And then as for some of those outfield options, I listed them already, but I think Tyler O'Neill seems like the most likely candidate at this point in time. Could always change, though, of course. Hunter Renfro account asks, where do you think Brady Singer ends up, and who are your bats do you think we try to acquire? Well, yeah, as for the outfield bats, I brought up the list of 5 or 6 guys that I really like there. And as for Brady Singer, until those trade rumors start circulating, I imagine he's going to be back in Kansas City because I just don't think the Royals have a true number 4 that could take over in that spot at this point in time. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we will wrap it all up on this edition of a Mailbag Friday, next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Our last sponsor we want to give a shout out to is PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. And PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. They also offer weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday, where each Tuesday PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value to your lineups. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup over at PrizePicks. We still have a lot to get into here, so I don't want to miss out on any questions. These might be more rapid fire than even the beginning of today's show because, yeah, we still might have 15 or so more. This one is from Chuck, bottom of the 9th, 6 pitches. Love to hear a commentary on those at-bats. That felt like a team at that point that was so tense and they were pressing. I mean, Vinny never looked comfortable in that at-bat, and he didn't really comfortable at all in the postseason. I applaud him for coming back. It was really a long shot for him to return this year. I'm super happy with the fact that he did, and he got to enjoy the postseason. But that's just a guy that's not 100%, and he clearly wasn't picking up the ball well. Salvi, I would like to say he can have better plate discipline. He just doesn't. He's a free swinger, and Luke Weaver took advantage of that. And as for Yuli Gurriel, at that point, you might just think that the first pitch of that at-bat might be the most hittable pitch in that spot. They were certainly not good at-bats, but really, who had a good at-bat in Game 4, the final game for the Royals season in 2024? MJ Melendez enthusiast asks, is Anthony Santander a realistic free agent option for a corner outfield spot? I really do. And I think what's funny is even though he had 44 home runs, which doesn't feel very Royal-like, he doesn't strike out a lot and he doesn't walk a lot. So to me, that feels like a good fit for the Royals. But I am wondering what they'd be willing to give over to him, considering he's not a very good defender. And the Royals love to value defense. So to me, I just don't know if it's a great fit. It's certainly realistic because the Royals know they need some more pop in that lineup. And Anthony Santander would certainly provide that. CC has the question of all the trade deadline acquisitions who are pending free agents, who is the most likely for Casey to try and bring back? And of all the homegrown guys, who is the most likely breakout candidate next year? I'm going to go breakout Michael Massey. I think if Michael Massey stays healthy all year long, he's an above-average second baseman and will be one of the better second basemen in the American League because I love the defense. He's got sneaky pop, and he showed out in the postseason from the leadoff spot. As for guys to return, I think Michael Lorenzen could. They want a swingman guy. Lorenzen was great in that spot for the Royals, and I think he's going to be very affordable and might take a one-year deal. So I think he'd be the most likely option to return who was acquired around the trade deadline, and I feel very strongly about that. JHB asked, what are the plans for the pitching staff moving forward for the rotation and bullpen? I think you're going to see pretty much the exact same group. For the rotation, as we talked about, Reagans, Lugo, Walker, Singer, Marsh, I think those would be the 5. And as for the bullpen, you bring back Ursig, you bring back Bubich, Hunter Harvey's going to be back, Schreiber's going to be back, Serpa's going to be back, Lynch will be back. You'll have Carlos Hernandez, Steven Cruz, Sam Long. You'd have to bring back on a one-year deal, but there's 9 or 10 options right there that I think would really look good in the bullpen. And they could also spend a little bit of money on one setup guy for the back end of the bullpen. But I think you're going to see a lot of the same guys next year. Jay Jelly asked, will Vinny or Jack be the Royals' future first baseman? Which position will the other players be moved to? I do think Caglione's going to be the future first baseman. I think here in a few years, Vinny's going to be pretty much isolated the DH role, but certainly will play a little bit at first base. Caglione could be a first baseman and right fielder. And so when Vinny does play the field, Jack would move out to right field. But Caglione's going to be the better first baseman in the long run. So I think that he is going to be the future first baseman for the Royals organization. Caleb asked, do you think any players we haven't seen in the majors yet will break spring training on the team? I could see somebody like a Noah Cameron or Eric Sarantola or, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the last name of somebody. It was a pitcher who had pitched well toward the very end of the season. I'm going to be kicking myself for this. I'm doing this on the fly with still a lot of questions to get to, so I do apologize for this. But Eric Sarantola's got great strikeout stuff. Wouldn't shock me if he just breaks out in spring training. I could look at somebody like a Noah Cameron, certainly. Guys like Blake Mitchell, Ben Cooter, and Carter Judson are still a ways away there. Gavin Cross could certainly, if they still had an opening in right field, I could see it with a good spring training. And then that last pitcher, I'm not sure. Steven Zobak, that's who I think it is. Steven Zobak could also be a guy that could break out in spring training and have a chance to make the roster. So those would be my options right there. But good question. I hadn't thought about that yet. Samuel asks, do you think we keep Alec Marsh as the opening day fifth starter, or do we get someone else in there? I do think it's going to be Marsh. I think they feel like he had a really good step forward this year, and he can make an even bigger stride next year. So right now, I am going to say yes, he will be the number 5 starter. Blaze has the question of what is Bubic's role next year? Does he stay in the pen or go to the starting rotation? Also, do you think Waka opts in? And if not, do we resign him anyway? I think Waka will opt in or have the qualifying offer accepted, at least right now. And I think Chris Bubic will be the setup guy for next year. MD Seats ask, arbitration could hurt this year. What the forecast? Also, who are we looking to add, and what guys are most likely not around in 2025? Who's the biggest name that could leave? Biggest name that could leave would be Michael Waka because of that player option and maybe declining the qualifying offer. And then a couple of the guys that we talked about adding, those outfield options. As for starting pitching, I would need to do a deeper dive. One relief pitcher I would like to name would be Paul Sewald. I think Paul Sewald would really fit well in the back end of the bullpen, though he's a guy with a lot of closing experience, and Lucas Erceg is going to be the closer, so he may not want to accept any deal from Kansas City. But not a bad question there. Ronnie asked, what is our current salary, and have you heard if they intend to up it? Yeah, unfortunately, I've just kind of run out of time on what the salary is. I know it's in the high 20s, if I'm not mistaken, or excuse me, the low 20s in terms of their ranking. And I do believe they're going to up it a little bit because I do think they're going to spend a little bit more money on the lineup in free agency. All right, these are all going to have to be incredibly quick for answers here. Just too many questions to get to in such little time. Bobby Wood Jr. for MVP says, seems to me our everyday infield is pretty much set. Is there anyone that you have that is locked into play outfield for us? I can't think of any. I'm going to go Kyle Isbell is probably the only guy right now that's locked into play center field because they love him out there and they love the defense. Jerry says, who are some realistic infielders and relievers to add in the offseason? I would say infielders would be an interesting approach. Right now, I would probably say a realistic infielder. Man, I don't know if there's anybody that comes to mind right now because some of the top guys that would be great for the Royals are going to be too expensive. So I'll do a deeper dive on that for an episode next week for infielders look at you because I've just kind of been focused on outfielders so far. Relievers, Paul Sewald could make sense. Ryan Stanek could make sense. Matt Moore could make sense. And some guys that may turn down some player options or qualifying offers could make a lot of sense. But again, I'll get all into that in a couple of episodes next week. This one comes from No Name. What's your offseason wish list for the Royals? Probably a big corner outfield bat and a big third baseman to give some more pop to the lineup. Perennial Losers ask, besides the vacancy at starting pitching, what position do we sign in the offseason? Corner outfield bat and third base would be my pick. Should the Royals part ways with MJ and Garcia? Asks Ben. I do not think those guys will be gone next year. I think they'll both be back, but not in starting roles. Corey asked, who is the Royal that will surprise most people from being moved / not returning? I'd probably say Brady Singer would surprise some people out there, unless you're just a big believer in Brady Singer getting moved at some point. Luke asked, chances we sign Santander and chances MJ's done in KC. I think done as a starter, yes, but not done in KC. Santander right now, I'll give it a 10% chance of happening until I hear more rumors on it. Sad Walker Season asks, realistic record prediction for next season. Assuming they improve the roster, is it easy to say that this year was just the start? I think next year I'm going to shoot for 90 wins. I think that if they can improve a little bit with that lineup and the bullpen can stabilize, I could see 4 extra wins there. So, I'm going to say right now it is the start of something because they've got an aggressive GM and an owner that is willing to spend a little bit of money there. Next one, it comes from Swaggy Lucas. Lynch looked great towards the end of the year. Next year, we will try to carve out a role for him in the rotation again, or will we keep him in the pen? Yeah, if the Royals don't do much with their rotation, I think Daniel Lynch will be back in that bullpen because he really thrived in that role the Royals had for him. Next one comes from Michael. Is Singer going to be traded? Right now, I'm going to say no, but I could see those rumors starting to circulate around the winter meetings in December. The JT Royals ask, who would you say took a big step forward this year and will next year? I think the biggest step forward was Cole Reagans. We put that pressure on him, that expectation, and he delivered and became a great postseason pitcher as well. Next year, I'm going to say that, well, I'll go Michael Massey again. I think Michael Massey takes a really big step forward next year, assuming that he can stay healthy. This one comes from Eli. Should we and could we hire Kevin Seitzer? Right now, I think the Royals like their hitting group, Alex Zumwalt, Keone Duran, those guys, a couple different hitting coaches. As long as the Royals connect with those players, I don't think there's a need to bring in Kevin Seitzer. Kevin Seitzer would need to be the guy. And right now, I think the Royals like Alex Zumwalt, unless he took a position back up in the front office. But I think the players mesh well with them, and that's really what matters, the hitting coach, that the hitters and the players, they get along with that guy, and they can really take in all of what that coach is trying to preach to them. Because I think more than anything, the Royals just need a little bit more pop in that lineup, more legitimate bats. And this year, they only had a few of them. Let's all be honest with that. And finally, Andrew asked, what are the trade candidates? Who would they target? And who are they willing to let go? Who's untouchable aside from the obvious four? Yeah, again, I think I'll dive into that in an episode later on next week. I would say they'd be willing to trade, a couple of bullpen arms as well. I mean, one that I've thought about is with Carlos Hernandez and Steven Cruz. I think one of them gets moved. As for, prospects, I still believe that, they need to pick a catcher for the future, whether that be Carter Jensen or Blake Mitchell or Ramon Ramirez. I think you get value with one of those guys being traded, and probably more likely that Ramon Ramirez of that bunch would get traded. I don't see Blake Mitchell getting traded at all. So you could, look into the prospect ranks and try to get some extra help there. But the Royals bring back a lot of major league talent. It's a much different scenario than it was last season, of course. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB. Baseball Guru Soli brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off Saturday and Sunday per usual, and we'll be back on Monday with some more offseason talk, and that'll be coming your way in a few days. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.